What a privilege we have to come back and assemble this evening and worship God as always. What I say, I pray will be pleasing and acceptable in His sight. Again, today I saw something on social media about how can you call yourself a Christian if you're celebrating people not getting their food that they so desperately need. Now, I don't know of any of us that would be celebrating that. That would make us a horrible person, would it not? But that does not mean that that is the responsibility of the local church to feed that. So that's what prompted this lesson, is to look at our giving, because the church has to have funds to operate. And how does it get that except it is being raised by the collection of the saints? 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2 is where much of our lesson came from. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. So that sums up pretty much everything that we need to know about our collection: how much, when we're to do it, how we're to do it as we prosper, as we looked at this morning, as we have purposed in our heart ahead of time, and we do so cheerfully. That doesn't, just because a specific amount is not given does not mean that God doesn't care about the amount that we are giving. Our giving shows where God is at in our life. If it's first where He should be, then like the children of Israel, we're going to be giving Him the first of what we have as we purpose in our heart first, not what's left over as we walk through the door as we come in here on Sunday. We looked at Haggai, Haggai. They were allowing the temple of God to lay in ruins while they had beautiful homes to live in. And they were told, you've got to correct this. You've got to correct that quickly, because where we left off with, we can rob God. What a sad thing that is to say, that we are stealing. We're taking what belongs to God. Remember in Malachi chapter 1, He told him, He said, go offer these. They were trying to offer sacrifices. What did God want? Well, He wanted the first and He wanted the best. And in Malachi 1, He said, go offer those blind and sick and lame to your governor and see if they would accept it. Well, of course, they're not going to accept it. We can't do that today. What's the first thing that comes out of our paycheck before anything else is the federal tax. They get their dollars up front and then some. Well, God isn't going to accept us offering Him scraps either. And we should be ashamed of trying to offer that to Him. And in Malachi chapter 3, beginning in verse 8, He asked them this question, and one that we need to be asking ourselves as well. Are we trying to keep to ourselves what belongs to God? Malachi chapter 3 and verse 8, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings? You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessings that there will not be room enough to receive it. They were trying to rob God of what was rightfully His, and they were cursed with a curse. That curse was because of their disobedience to God and not honoring Him properly. And we too can be guilty of God, even if we put something in the collection plate. I talked this morning about our attendance in our worship service. There's more required than my behind occupying a space on the pew for my worship to be pleasing to God. And the same with my giving, just like those that Jesus was observing, throwing in money into the treasury out of their abundance. That didn't mean as much as the little widow woman that put in all that she had. she was giving him her all. Are we giving God our all? Now we know that as Christians today, that we are under a better covenant. As we discussed and have studied over a few lessons, a month or so ago, Heath brought a lesson about the difference between the Old and the New Testament. We're under the New Testament now. We're not under the Old Covenant any longer. And we would have never been under it because we are not Jews. We were not born as a children of one of the children of Israel. It would have never been for us. That was for a very specific group of people that was under that law, those that were born into it. And the children of Israel, they were commanded to tithe. Now, we hear this word a lot. And the religious world will throw this word around and misuse it because they don't understand what it means. Tithing is different than our contribution. In Leviticus chapter 27 and in verse 30, beginning, Leviticus chapter 27 and beginning in verse 30. And all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. If a man wants at all to redeem any of his tithes, he shall add 1/5 to it. And concerning the tithe of the herd or the flock or whatever passes under the rod, the 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. He shall not inquire whether it is good or bad, nor shall he exchange it. And if he exchanges it at all, then both it and the one exchanged for it shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. Tithing is giving 10%, but not just 10% of their income. They were giving 10% of absolutely everything that they had. Now, sometimes Christians use this tithing, as this 10%, as their yardstick to measure whether or not this is, or am I giving enough? Or am I giving 10%? That's what my tithe is. It's going to be 10%. That's not always an accurate calculation, is it? Because not only were they giving 10% of their income, they were giving 10% of everything that they had. That would add up to a whole lot more than just 10% from our paycheck. But as I said, Christians are under a better covenant than the children of Israel. Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 6 tells us that we know that the old law was not meant to last forever. It was only set up as a shadow of things to come. And now that we are under it, it is no longer in effect. In Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 6, but now he has obtained a more excellent ministry, inasmuch as he is also mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises. Yes, it's better because, as Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 23 tells us, a better sacrifice was offered for that covenant. What did they offer? Well, they offered their flocks, the bulls and goats and rams. They made animal sacrifices. They made sacrifices of their grain and their food and the fruit of the ground that they had created. Well, we have a much better sacrifice today to pay for this covenant, to set it in place. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 23 tells us that. Therefore, it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. Well, that better sacrifice was the Son of God. Jesus on the cross, he shed his blood for our sins, not the offering of these animal sacrifices that they did under the old law, but Jesus offering himself as the sacrifice. That's why under the New Testament, we're not commanded to give a specific amount or 10% of everything as the way the children of Israel is. We are to do so as we have purposed in our heart, and we are to give bountifully and cheerfully. That's what 2 Corinthians chapter 9 says. We looked at that this morning, verses 6 and 7. When we did do the giving Right after the Lord's Supper, we would often quote that verse about us giving from a cheerful heart because God loves a cheerful giver. Why would we feel comfortable in any way since we're under a new and a better covenant? Why would we feel comfortable in giving less than what the children of Israel did under the old law? So the question then should be asked, are we giving as we should? It does matter how much we give. Our giving should show that God comes first in our lives. It is possible for us to rob God and to lose our soul in the process of that. And what we give should be a reflection of our gratitude towards God because of all that He has blessed us with. Not only living under a better covenant, but all that we have in this life. I mean, the poorest people in this country are wealthy by some parts of the world. Look at what's happening to Christians over in Nigeria right now and other places in this world. They are facing persecution like those in the first century church did. Look at how blessed that we are. And yet some are satisfied with throwing $1 or $2 in the collection plate on Sunday morning and think that that's good. They feel justified in that. So why is there then? The last question, in the part 3 of the lesson that we want to look at is, and to answer the first part of the question that we asked this morning that we began with, is people saying that the church should be taking care of all these people that are losing their benefits. Like we should set up some kind of a soup kitchen or food pantry in this building and open it up to the community. Now, we have some funds. It would not last indefinitely, but we do have some stored up that could probably tide over this neighborhood for a few months and keep them from going hungry if we spent what we had in reserve. But is that where the church, is that what the church can spend funds on? Now, the first century church, we looked at them in 1 Corinthians. Paul had given them orders to make the collection so that they had it stored up so that when he came to get it, it would be ready for him. But does this mean we have this money in the bank account? Does this mean that we are free and clear to spend that money on whatever we see we determine ourselves as the need is? Is that up to us to spend the money that is now belonging to God on all these things? I mean, think about all the needs that we see in our community. There are many. And there are many that are legitimate. And I believe that there are probably some people that are worrying about their food benefits that legitimately need help. But is that the place for the Lord's church to do that? Well, we're not going to find any specific example in the New Testament that would say that it is. We are going to find what the money is to be used for. The first is in support of gospel preachers. In Philippians chapter 4, and beginning in verse 15, the church at Philippi had helped support Paul in his preaching to spread the gospel. Philippians chapter 4 and in verse 15, he says, "Now you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me concerning giving and receiving, but only you. For even in Thessalonica you sent aid once and again for my necessities. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the first fruits that abounds to your account." You know, here, thankfully, we have been blessed, and in our business meetings, usually there's always seemingly one that has come to light that is in need of help. We're blessed enough to be able to help support some men around the country that are working to profess the gospel and preach the gospel. And we should should feel very blessed to be able to do that. But a man who is trying to preach can make his living. He is deserving, and it's scriptural for him to be paid to do that. And he should be paid so that he can continue doing that. That is helping spread the word of God. Paul took wages from other churches to work at Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 8. Probably the church at Philippi would be one of them. He says he robbed other churches here. In 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 8, I robbed other churches, taking wages from them to minister to you. So he was receiving help and support from other churches so that he could do his work for Corinth. He was taking these wages for that service. The word translated here is signifying and harkens back to the provisions given to a Roman soldier. As if he was saying, I had my basic necessities covered. Now, we would know that a soldier is not living in the lap of luxury, but they have their basic necessities covered. They have food and raiment, and the necessities for life that they need are covered while they are in the battlefield and while they are serving the country. And that's what Paul is saying here, the words that were translated here. I have this taken care of by other churches while I'm laboring for you to help you with your salvation. Now, a preacher does not have to be paid. It is not required of that if he doesn't need to, because if we remember back to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, here Paul said, even though he had authority to get paid from them, he didn't want to be a burden on them. So he worked night and day, so he didn't have to take money from them to help support the teaching and preaching of the gospel out, and didn't want to take the money out of their collection. Now, also, as part of, as a necessary inference, we could look at expenses like Bibles, the materials that we buy, workbooks, the pamphlets that are back there. All those are put in use for helping to spread the gospel. Even the building itself would be a necessity. We have to have some place to meet somehow. It would be anything that would be considered a tool for teaching and spreading the gospel would be what that money could be used for. And secondly, to help needy saints. Now that's an important word. The world will just like to help the needy. That's what anybody that's needy. And often, well, not every service, but we have had times where people have come to the church expecting to get money from the church because they claim to be needy. Just a couple weeks ago, we had one come here. I didn't mean for all that to pop up at once, but I probably deleted the timings when I was messing with the other ones up here. But in Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, they were accused of neglecting their widows. And the apostles addressed this issue in Acts chapter 6. It says here in Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, now in those days when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. Now they were helping these people that were in need. The apostles were saying, we don't have time. We're busy in preaching and spreading the gospel. So they addressed it by putting others over that. Now most, and sadly many in the religious world, has taken this to the extreme and used this to show that the church is responsible for helping all the needy in the world. Now, yes, we have a healthy contribution, especially for as few people as we have. We have some money saved up in the bank here that we have put aside as part of our contribution. How fast do you think we would go through that? And how, well, impossible would it be for us to build that back up to where it is now if we were helping every needy person in Hamilton? We would blow through it in few days, because that's not what it's for. It's not for the church to fulfill every need that is in the community. Notice the theme on the slides that were here. It's for helping the saints who are in need. That's the job of the church. Now, I gave on Sunday, so I shouldn't have to give any other day of the week, right? No, that's not. I have a personal responsibility to help, and I should be doing that as I have the ability. But where do we find it as the job of the church to help the community at large? In Acts chapter 4, and beginning in verse 34, we see Christians selling their excess to give to the apostles so they could help those in need. And again, this would show, if we looked at the context of this, that it's church members. It's the saints. Beginning in verse 4, nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold and laid them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each one as anyone had need. And as we go through this, we're going to see that there's also a very specific way in which the church can distribute to the actual needy. We talked about this passage here a few weeks ago. Notice that that's plural. The lands, there's an S on that. The houses, these church members had more than they needed. And here they took and they sold their possessions because there was a legitimate need to give to those who were in need. And think about the time in the world that was happening and what was happening around them during this time frame. Our now Apostle Paul, but then Saul of Tarsus, was doing his level best to destroy anything that had anything at all to do with Christians, and going into houses and taking them away. They had been driven from their homes. Probably because of that, they lost their jobs and their livelihoods. There was a great need because of the persecution that had arose. Their lives had been turned over and uprooted. Do you think a saint would have some need that we as the church should be able to help out in a situation like that? Well, I would say yes, for a fact. We have areas of the world where floodings or hurricanes have happened, and those saints there have lost everything that they have. Yes, the church can put its money to help them if we know that they are Christians. Now, again, I can help a lot more on my own than the church as a whole can, because there's ways to handle that scripturally. Helping others in need. Romans chapter 12 and verse 13. If we read Romans chapter 12, that's the synopsis of the Christian life. It's the part of the foundation is helping those in need. Romans 12 and verse 13. Distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. But notice the saints. The church does not have the authority to go out as taking money out of that contribution that we've looked at in 1 Corinthians 16 and just giving it out to anybody that says they're in need. Now, as a Christian, as Paul tells us in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, we're to do good to all, especially those in the household of faith. When we see a need as a Christian, I should want to help. But what the church can do with its money has limitations. 1 Timothy chapter 5, beginning in verse 3, talks about that. It's limited on who we can help as individuals. And Paul lays out some very specific guidelines here on who can and cannot be taken care of by the church. Now, there's a difference, and I keep stressing that, between the church and its individual members. There are some who the church cannot help that I should be obligated to do so. 1 Timothy chapter 5, beginning in verse 3, Paul says, honor widows who are really, really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Now she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues in supplication and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things command that they may be blameless. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, but if she has diligently followed every good work, but refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. Therefore, I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some have already turned aside after Satan. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. Now, that may seem kind of harsh to us in thinking about, well, these little old ladies, sorry if I offend any little old ladies, but we can't take them in and we can't help them. Well, not if there's someone in their family that needs to be taking care of them. That's up to them. It's my responsibility. It's not the church's responsibility or burden, as Paul says here at the end of this reading here. Don't let the church have that on their rolls. The church has other things that it must do with the money, mainly spreading the gospel. That's what that money's for. It's not to be doled out and look at the number of people on the rolls of our public service here in our government. There are many people on that. Some probably deserve it, some probably not so much. But Paul is saying, don't bring them in, because once you get them on, it's going to be much harder to remove them, and spend the money on them when there are really those in need that we need to be supporting. And again, what I can do as an individual, what I am allowed to support is our individual money is completely different. And I'm obligated to support those when I see a need than what the contribution for the church can. Now, this would be a good topic. We could do a standalone lesson on this, but we're not going to this evening to talk about groups like, and this one's not being singled out because of anything in particular, but I'm sure we've all heard of Matthew 25 ministries. Anytime there is a storm or disaster, there they go off running to take aid to them. And many churches will support them. Well, we'll send it to the middleman so we don't have to do it. They'll go and find the need and take care of it. And many churches support organizations like that. Again, we cannot find one example in the book of Acts where that has happened, where there was some third party that the church was giving the money to, and then that organization was then distributing it. We see direct support from point A to point B, and there's nothing in between. And there's a reason for that. And it shows God's wisdom in that. Because the second that we start supporting these other, now again, me personally, completely different story. The church's money, when we start supporting these organizations, what happens when they start teaching and preaching something that is not according to the scriptures? Well, we're putting our stamp of approval on that. as Westview Church of Christ, sending our money to support an organization like Matthew 25 Ministries. Am I saying that those groups don't do good? No. Can't possibly say that. They rush in at times and help people when there is no one else there to do so. It's not the place for Westview Church of Christ to be sending funds to this middle organization to take care of that. We cannot find one example of that in the scriptures that says we are to do that. Not one. There's no middleman required, no middleman found. The church gives directly to either the congregation or the individual in need, and that's where it stops. Again, the simplicity of Christ. We don't have all these extra layers of, what would we call it in our government, bureaucracy. If you look at the amount of money that comes in some organizations that actually gets to where it needs to go versus what's spent on the layers at the top, the CEOs and the market. Hey, I make money off of marketing teams like that. They're sending them out and all that filters down. And then you look at how much actually gets to the ones in need. Well, it may be 10% of what they take in. And that's why we don't have an example of the church sending money to do that, because God wants all of his money to go where it belongs. Not to some middleman for administrative cost. There's nowhere when we hear these people talking about the church needs to step up and feed those who are losing benefits. Yes, we're in a terrible situation in our country for a variety of reasons. But to automatically make the knee-jerk assumption that the church is the one that's required to solve that is not found anywhere within the pages of the New Testament. But we do have a responsibility to give. And we're to give as we have been prospered, as we have purposed in our heart, with joy, because we're able and blessed to return back a portion to the Lord that he has blessed us so richly with. So if you're subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, we take this time to think about the condition of our soul, reflect on our lives, and if there's changes that need to be made, then let's do so now while we have that opportunity, because we may not have a better opportunity. We may have another one, but we won't have a better one, because we're not guaranteed a new day tomorrow. We're not even guaranteed that we'll finish this night. So if you're subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, we invite you to come as we stand and sing. I gave my life.